if the chemtrail report was accurate, there is still no evidence that the levels were caused by chemicals sprayed from planes.
I think it's pretty fun. I think it's pretty fun. I think it's pretty fun. I think it's pretty fun.
Chad Verdalio is the president of Sawyer Aviation. He's been flying for nearly 20 years and says he's seen every type of contrail shape and formation in his years in the sky, and all of them are easily explained.
On drier days, you won't see them. That's why so many days here in the valley, we don't see contrails overhead. But on days where it's more humid or maybe there's a storm coming, you'll be able to see contrails.
The EPA states contrails can linger for long periods of time and, depending on winds, can appear to be spreading or falling to the ground, but they don't. Verdalio says if planes were spraying chemicals in a mass conspiracy, you would see the plumbing on the wings. You would see the plumbing on the wings. You would see the plumbing on the wings. Someone would have blown the whistle by now.
Every contrail is a good old-fashioned airplane exhaust, and that's all it is.
Someone would have blown the whistle by now.
Every contrail is a good old-fashioned airplane exhaust, and that's all it is.
Someone would have blown the whistle by now.
Every contrail is a good old-fashioned airplane exhaust, and that's all it is.
Aerosol spraying is immediately obvious here, with no invisible gap between the engine and the visible trail. More importantly, we see a leak in the aerosol container inside the belly of the aircraft that is causing an intermittent third trail to be left behind. Notice as the camera pans back through the trail, how the aerosols look dirty in color. They are almost brown. These are not aerosols that will reflect light back into space. These are aerosols that warm the climate. We see no gap between the engine and the visible trail. Also notice that the trail is bifurcated, as if the aerosols are coming from two different sources inside the engine.
Chemtrails, yeah. You got a lot of chemtrails over here. Big sky, big chemtrail. Does anyone know what a chemtrail is? Will you turn to the person to your left and explain what a chemtrail is? Remember when the sky used to be blue? It was just blue? And then there was this toxic death smoke. Yes. Okay, my name's Billy. I'm now lecturing you about chemtrails. Just Google Billy Corgan chemtrails.
what he said affects all of us. He said something that really hit home about this phenomenon of chemtrails. And, you know, when I was a kid, I used to see these trails in the sky all the time. And so, well, that's cool. A jet just went over. You started to see a whole bunch of them. And the next thing you knew, everybody in your neighborhood was fighting and arguing, and you didn't know why. Okay, and you really didn't know why. I mean, everybody was fighting. So he started riffing about the chemtrails, and he started to say things that hit home so hard. And I would recommend that everybody try to get what he said online or wherever, and try to get a copy of it and just listen to it, because I was so moved that I had to write the song. The other thing is the first line of the song says, I was born on the same plantation in the United
Chemtrails doing weather modification in Hawaii and other areas. Aluminum's going off the chart. Monsanto's now coming out with a whole, and barium, they're coming out with a whole line of now aluminum resistant crops, so that you have to buy for Monsanto, and it's the same thing. They're poisoning our...
What about the spraying, what about the chemtrail stuff of spraying barium to kill our food?
Totally true.
Get rid of our food.
Give us your view on chemtrails, geoengineering.
Well, it's just, they're poisoning us and our food, and it's all about that. It's all about that. So like I say, it's the exact same people that are, getting all the power into their hands, all the power for food. Next is privatizing water. I imagine they'll do air after that. I mean, if we don't stand up now and do something together and find a way to agree with people, instead of we can't 100% agree, and this is me and you, Alex, we can't 100% agree with everything that each of us believes, but we can 75% agree, and we'd better do it. We'd better find a way for Tea Partiers and liberals and lefties and whoever. We better come up with a solution and all get together and use it.
that we are in a global drumbeat right at the moment talking about climate change and global warming. One of the things that is affected by climate change is agriculture. But some of what we are seeing is man-made, but man-made in a different way than you may guess. Weather modification programs, experimental ones done by private companies, done by the United States government, done by states across the United States, are underway. There's more than 50 of them in operation across the United States. All of these impact agriculture because they change the microclimates needed for agriculture to survive. None of these programs that I know of today, and this is all public record, are available at any time with oversight, agricultural oversight or public oversight. These programs impact agriculture, and there are programs around the world. International corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Most of it is chemically altered, so that what happens is that we are putting chemicals, ground-based chemicals that are shot into the air, or chemicals coming from airplanes that change and modify our weather. So one of the things that I'm concerned about and that we need to address in the future is how these programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. If we change the growing season, the pollinators may not survive, and also our crops, our flowers, and our tree crops may not get the pollination needed. So one of my areas is looking at this situation to see if we can begin to put under control experimental and other types of weather modification programs. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather an undefined term at this period of time. And so what happens is that many times we're talking about artificially putting chemicals like sulfur or particulates into the atmosphere in what they call geoengineering schemes to reduce and help the planet, supposedly, but help the planet to not go through such a tremendous global climate change and to mitigate global warming. However, the incidence of putting chemicals into our atmosphere is going to change and impact agricultural crop production. And if you take and you put up into our skies chemicals to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth, you are going to begin to reduce crop production. Studies at the University of Illinois on corn crop production show reductions. Without the process of photosynthesis, whereby plants from direct sunlight gain the energy to grow, to produce crops, we are going to find ourselves, if we mitigate in that direction, impacting the crop production not only here in the United States, but worldwide. One of the things that is impacting crop production right now in the United States and reducing photosynthesis and also impacting the ability of solar power panels to generate the type of power that they should is persistent jet contrails. NASA talks about persistent jet contrails as exacerbating global warming because they trap warmth in the atmosphere when they produce cirrus and man-made clouds. NASA also talks about that these aircraft leaving persistent contrails are changing our climate. And when they change our climate to the degree that one jet can leave a persistent jet contrail, which will spread across our skies from what this picture up here on my left on the screen looks like, which is a trail left by a jet, that trail can expand to 4,000 kilometers and last for 20 hours. This was unheard of in the early 60s and the 70s, and it wasn't until the late 1980s that there was a change and we started to have persistent jet contrails that persist. NASA studies show that part of our global warming problem could be attributed to these types of contrails and the jets that leave them. So one of the issues as we go through is, how do you like your skies, natural or man-made? And right now, we are making man-made clouds, and this is trapping warmth in our atmosphere. The climate change that is produced by these jets, not all jets, mostly some non-commercial, but what happens to our skies is that we start to see the changes. The man-made clouds do trap the warmth, and they increase the humidity. This allows for pests to proliferate, diseases, molds, mildews, funguses, and viruses. This is a man-made cloud, ladies and gentlemen, and these pictures I took myself over Northern California, and this is a burst. This is where a jet left a huge plume, and then this turned in at the end of it to a burst, and this is not normal, never seen before in our county historically, and I was born and raised there. This is another picture showing the jet trail just before the burst. This is our skies, and I want you to know that what you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. And what happens as we reduce the amount of sunlight in a form of global dimming, we reduce the solar power with these type of clouds, and we reduce photosynthesis, which is going to impact agriculture. The pictures look odd. The formations don't look like normal clouds that people have seen before historically. This is another type of man-made cloud, and what we have done and what you're seeing here is we have the photographs from the times that the jet leaves the first trail as a thin, spindly trail to where they form into these different types of cloud formations. All of you can start looking up and seeing this. What happens is that there are experiments, and there's a color, you can see some color in this photograph. And part of what we're doing also is we're sending up canisters. The United States government, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, is sending up canisters into the atmosphere filled with chemicals to modify and experiment with our ionosphere. And when we modify and experiment with our ionosphere up here, we create experiments which they can see through these persistent jet contrails as they stay in the sky for long periods of time, and they can watch the experiments. The type of chemicals they are using are aluminum, barium, strontium, and these canisters are sent up on rockets, and what they do is they superheat the canisters to create experiments in our atmosphere. The experiments can give you colorful auroras, which they talk about as being wonderful. Many times people think that the auroras in Alaska and the ones we see are normal, but there's beginning to be more and more seen across the United States and elsewhere where aluminum, trimethyl aluminum experiments to make clouds are beginning to impact us. The reason I am concerned for agriculture is that none of these experiments have any public oversight nor agricultural oversight. Our drinking water is impacted because the chemicals are now beginning to show up in our drinking water. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into, with increased pollution and acid rain, gets into the root systems of our crop trees and our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought. But they're not. What happens is that the root systems can no longer absorb the water and the nutrients needed to survive. Many of our forests in Redding, California and other areas are dying. The oak trees, the redwood trees, the Douglas fir across the United States, many areas. We believe that these trees are impacted because they cannot absorb enough water because aluminum is going into their root systems. Also molds, mildew, and fungus from warmer temperatures produced by persistent jet contrails are also allowing pests and molds to proliferate, also impacting tree health and crop health. The skies that you see up here, it is important to note, have a white haze to them. When crossing the United States 2 days ago, we saw this man-made produced haze all the way across the United States. There were a few real clouds. We saw the persistent jet contrails from the jet windows, and the skies in the white haze looked a lot like this. So one of the things that we need to really look at is that jet fuel emissions contaminate our air, much as automobile exhaust. They know from scientific studies back in the 1970s that they deplete beneficial ozone in the atmosphere by releasing nitric acid. So one of the things that we need to look at is the impact of just jet fuel and just the emissions from jets as well. I want to go on and talk briefly about a couple of issues here that I think are important for everyone to realize. If we don't look at the problems that we are creating, the atmospheric testing programs, in other words, the jet contrails that are warming our climate, and we say to ourselves, we want to geoengineer something else. We want to add more particulates to help global warming or to stop climate change. What we're going to have is we're going to have a pea soup up there of chemicals which are going to be detrimental to our health. It is much better to take the EPA model of the 1970s, where the Environmental Protection Agency was designed to put in regulations to reduce the pollution at its source, to reduce and put caps on how much pollution corporations, cars, automobiles were putting into the atmosphere. One of the things that we're talking about as mitigation is to go into geoengineering plans which add more chemicals to our atmosphere, which are going to get into our drinking water supplies, which are going to get into our soils, which are going to impact our trees. Our trees across the United States, many of them in many areas, especially Mendocino, Lake, and Sonoma County, are dying. They are not healthy as they used to be. And this problem, having traveled across the United States into some other areas, seeing the pictures coming in from across the United States and other countries, we're finding that there's beginning to be an impact from all of these programs and all the chemicals in our skies. And so one of the things we need to think about and work for is reducing pollution. Alan Buckman from the California State Department in Fish and Game talked about microbes, and they're important to the environment. We have at our disposal already some technologies and already the wherewithal to begin to make the planet more healthy and to put it into a different perspective. But if we go to the geoengineering schemes that are waiting in the wings, thousands of them, to put the particulates up and sulfur, then we are going to be in trouble with agriculture across the United States and around the world. It is time that we look at some different solutions that are already here, and it's time that we look at what's happening in our skies and say we don't need to add any more chemicals, we are doing enough. And what these experiments in our skies are doing with atmospheric heating and testing, we don't know, but the chemicals are showing up in our drinking water. So in closing, I would like to say to all of you and to encourage you to know that just what I showed you today is beginning to impact crop production in the United States. And we're seeing higher UV radiation that is burning the tips of our trees and our plants. We see the molds and mildews growing here, and we see all of this, and we hope that all of you will consider before you think of mitigation and just go forward with some of the plans that are being sold to you as almost a cap-and-trade situation, where a corporation like Planktos decides to put iron dust into the Galapagos Islands area. This is a proposal, may have already started, and to create algae blooms. And yes, they're saying, yes, we're going to help the environment because we're going to create these algae blooms for more oxygen. But what happens is it's going to impact the marine life in those areas. As a geoengineering plan, it is going to be sold, the credits for this, the supposed benefits, is to be sold as credits to people who want to pollute more. And here's the really awful twist to this, in my opinion, is if we sell pollution credits to polluters to ask them so that they can pollute more, we're only going to add more to our climate change and to our global warming processes. We have to say, no, we don't want money market schemes that are going to go into the ocean and change something possibly to the detriment of our oceans or our air, in order to sell credits to someone who wants to pollute more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a consideration for all of you when you start to talk about caps and trades, when you start to talk about geoengineering plans, because we don't need a money market scheme. We need to have and use the microbes available to us, the science available to us to reduce the pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere. And we need a new direction, and I think that this might be a good one. So I hope that all of you will consider what I have to say today, and I want to thank you once again for listening to what I had to say.
Could you give me a direct answer? Because it says you're the scientist here on the NASA website.
Yeah, I'm involved in the project, but...
You are a scientist, so then, and you know that this is experimental, you've never done it before?
No, it's been done in the 1970s, it's been done recently in the 1990s and 2000s.
Oh, that's not what it said on this article here.
It hasn't been done since 1970, the lithium release in the daytime.
Why would it be done now then, sir? That's scary.
Detailed information. If you could please send your comments by email.
Okay, will you respond to my email if I send them?
Happy to answer them, yes.
You will. Okay, what was your email, sir?
Douglas.e.Rowland, D-O-U-G-L-A-S.
Douglas. I'm sorry?
E.
Dot
Rowland, R-O-W-L-A-N-D.
At,
NASA.gov.
I'm sorry?
NASA.gov. NASA.gov.
Okay. Well, I will be expecting an email back from you then, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very important we communicate what we're doing to the public. We're very interested in making sure everyone knows what we're doing. We're not, we're a civilian space agency dedicated to science and research and so on. So we're very keen to make sure that the taxpayers know what we're doing and everything. So. Well,
you know, when the article came out in the major newspapers, including the Huffington Post, there was no mention of lithium. Not one. Not one mention of lithium. Until I heard the recording of the actual, I listened to it. I listened to the rockets go off. I had no idea there was going to be a lithium dispersed until I heard payload, lithium dispersed.
Right. There was lithium dispersed, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it. I think you might be under some misconceptions about what we're doing, but I'm happy to tell you any details that you need.
Well, I know that it says in your article that you're doing it for communications.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. There are many reasons we're doing it.
Okay.
We don't understand how the wind in the upper atmosphere moves.
Mm-hmm.
In these chemtrails, there's different kinds of chemtrails, as you probably know. Different trails at night we use and different trails during the day. The wind blows them around. They glow either on their own or from scattered sunlight. We take pictures and we can see how the wind trail moves around and use that to infer what the wind is. Just like if you were taking a picture of an airplane contrail, you can use that to see how the wind was blowing up at those altitudes. This is much higher altitude, so we use these chemical trails.
And what is the purpose of knowing what the wind's going to do in the ionosphere?
The purpose is the ionosphere is really to understand our planet. It's very fundamental science. We're trying to understand every day. We know there's electric currents that flow over the head. They're just naturally there. They've been there for ever since the Earth had an atmosphere and a magnetic field. And the wind is driven by the sun. The sun heats the atmosphere. The wind blows. And every day that wind drives an electric current. And we're trying to understand what causes that. Essentially, how does it work in detail? And also importantly, when the sun becomes active with lots of sunspots and lots of magnetic activity, that changes the wind pattern and changes the electric current. So we want to understand both what it is on a regular day when there's no solar activity, and then what it is when there's a lot of solar activity.
Is there some other kind of a way that you can use it without dispersing the lithium?
We're researching other ways. The lithium is actually harmless to the environment, and we could show you more about that. But it is tricky to use because it's very faint. You can't see it with your naked eye. You have to, have special cameras to see it and so on. So we don't like to use it for that reason. It's hard. In other words, it's hard measurement to make. We're researching other ways to put sensors directly on the rocket to measure the wind, and those are ongoing. We're trying to develop those now. In fact, one of the purposes of this mission was to do that.
Okay. Well, you've explained it to me then. I don't agree with it, but I appreciate you explaining it to me.
Email too if you have detailed questions, anything you want.
Okay, I will. I'm gonna research it a little more, and I will email you. And I appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me today, sir.
Your call. It's not often we get to hear from members of the public and people who are really interested and concerned with what we're doing. I really appreciate your time.
I wish more people would call. I really do. I've called my senators. I've called my governor. You can't get through to anyone, sir. You can't get through to anybody.
Yeah.
I go to my city council. I live in rural North Carolina. They don't care. They laugh you out of there. There's no other recourse for us, sir, unless to talk to people directly and find out what is going on, because we're paying for it.
Well, I don't know how far you are from Walls Flight Facility. Is that easy? Is that drivable from where you are?
Where is it, sir? I don't know where it is.
It's north of Norfolk, Virginia. It's on the eastern shore of Virginia. If you're at Norfolk, it would probably take you another 2.5 hours to get there. So if you're in North Carolina, I don't know where you are, but maybe.
Right. Yeah, I'm in western rural North Carolina near the Tennessee border.
Have a chance. You might consider either going to Goddard Space Flight Facility, which is outside of D.C. There is Clemson University, which is where all the chemical release work is done.
Oh, really? Well, that's very close to me.
You might contact those guys. I'm sure they'd be happy to explain what they're doing.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I will do that. Just ask for the science department.
Well, I don't know what department they're in, but Larson, Larsen, Miguel Larson is the lead, and he's been doing this for decades and can explain in detail what they're doing and why it's not an issue for people living. We wouldn't, we would be, as a government agency, we would not be allowed, to do anything that would be harmful. So he's under strict controls and that sort of thing. So he can explain it to you. He can even show you around, that sort of thing.
Okay, and you said his name was Miguel Larsen with an L?
Larsen.
Okay, at Clemson. Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Rowland. I appreciate all of your information.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a nice day.